So we're back at it again, of course. I just wanted to do another video on the reclassification of the American Indian to Negro, color, and black, and then in 1988 they made us African American. And the reason why, again, it's just touching up on these videos to keep our minds just firmly, matter-of-factly knowing, right? Because you want to know matter-of-factly without a shot of a doubt who you are matter-of-factly. And so this is just me going in over this information. Again, this is not my information. This is information that is in congressional office, while in the state registrar's offices. You can find this act and other laws similar to it in other states being enacted from the eugenics movement, and it is still utilized today. So anyway, going on into that, we're just going to read about the 1924 Racial Integrity Act of Virginia, passed in the 1924. The law was designed to preserve racial purity by legally enforcing the one-drop rule. The racist idea that any person with African, right? Remember, this is pseudoscience, because DNA analysis for your nationality or race, it was not done until the 2000s, right? So Walter Ashby Plecker and the eugenics pseudoscientists would have not had any DNA analysis to be able to give any of these conclusions and these false narratives, right? They could not push one drop of what? You cannot prove that having brown skin is equivalent to being African or anything else for that matter. You understand me? So they had no DNA analysis to be able to, with ocular proof, substantiate that. So it is pseudoscience because it was not backed by any real DNA or genetic studies. So going on, they were just going based on a look. And the reason why they needed the look erased was to be able to steal land. You hear about the $5 Indians, and through very different, Camario Ahu, several different prominent figures who talk about this all the time and show their resources of how they changed many of these Mongols, Chino slaves, and made them these Asian slaves who became indigenous vassals of the Spanish royal crown in the 1600s when brought to America as servants. And then you see them and some Mongolian Russians who came in during the same time as the Slavs coming together, making boarding schools, and ultimately using $5 and gaining land through lynchings, and implementing acts of law in Congress and statewide, basically, erasure of American Indian, using their phenotype to be able to take the land. And this was all done after 1840. After 1840s, when the Slavs and the Russians came into America to invade us original American Indian. That was a lot to say, but I was trying to get it all out. But anyway, so let's go back on. So it says the racist idea that any person of any African ancestry considered black rather than white. Now, I'm going to read the Racial Integrity Act, and in it does not stipulate African at all. So that is conjecture, and it's just, they just throwing it in there, right? Because it never mentions African at all in the Racial Integrity Act. It was part of Virginia's broader program of eugenics and racial segregation. Under this Racial Integrity Act, Virginia officials, especially Walter Plecker, and heads of the Bureau of Vital Statistics, ordered the American Indians could not be officially recorded as Indian. Plecker claimed, right, that most people identifying, listen what he says right here. Plecker claimed that most people identifying as Indian had Negro blood. So what he's basically saying is most people who are Indian in America were brown skin, right? Because this is what he's basing it off. Because again, like I said, DNA analysis and testing for race and nationality was not done until the 2000s, right? So what in the 1924, there was no DNA analysis that could be done to determine one's nationality or race. So this is pseudoscience. He went based on a look. Your hue complexion says, oh no, we all know why he did it. They wanted the land, right? It's still what they're fighting over today, right? The land of milk and honey. That's how the $5 Indians came to be. And there's a map of where these $5 Indians, and I'm going to show you that as well, conquered many of these these American Indians' lands. So anyway, going back on, he said, identified as Indians had Negro blood and therefore should be classified as colored. As a result, birth, marriage, and death certificates of many Native American families were changed from Indian to colored or Negro. Right? And it says this seizure had devastating effects. Native communities in Virginia, like the Monocan and Pamunkey, Mattapony, and other, lost legal recognition of their identity. Many tribal members were recorded as Black or African American. Hear that again. Hear what it says. Later impact. Many tribal members were recorded as Black or African American in state and federal documents for decades. Hear this again, what it just said, y'all. Many tribal members. Now, anybody on that reservation called African American? Is anybody on those reservations called African American? The answer is no. Hear what it just said. It said later impacts. Many tribal members were recorded as Black or African American in state federal documents for decades. So this is letting you know who is the original American Indians according to the 1924 Racial Integrity Act. It says we will no longer we will no longer call these people Indian, but Negro, color, and Black. And then it fast forward to 1988. It says many tribal members were recorded as Black or African American in state and federal documents for decades. It says it wasn't later until the 20th century, especially after the Civil Rights Movement and through state and federal tribal recognition efforts, that Virginia tribes began to have their Indian identity restored. But many of us have not, right? Because they still have us under African American and they still have us under Black. Right? So we're going on. I'm trying to tell y'all that I'm trying to just show you matter of factly how you are not African at all. If you are a Black person who have been in America and you can trace your family 1817 1600s, I can trace mine into 1689. And it's prior to white people being here. Remember, they were not called white. They were called Slavic, right? These Mongolians were also called, these Russians, they were called Russians. When you read the terminology of the Racial Integrity Act, it is going to state races such as Chinese, Japanese, Caucasian, but then they call people Black. That is not a race. That is a color. They are referring to one's hue of complexion as a race, which is fraud. It is fictitious because Japanese is not called Japanese based on their color. Do you understand? I'm trying to make people understand this. Like, they're not called Japanese based on their hue of complexion. They're not called Caucasian based on their hue of complexion. Because if you go back into the history of Japan, there were people who had dark hues of complexion and light hues of complexion. If you go into many of these nations, people had light and dark hues of complexion. So calling somebody Black or yellow or any of those type of colors is not a race. And we're going to get into the Racial Integrity Act so we can show you what it matter of factly said. And it never mentions African ever in it. Ever in it. I don't want this to be long, but okay, you get it. All right, we're going to go into the Racial Integrity Act. All right, so we're going to go into the Racial Integrity Act, and it says, we're going to start at the beginning. This is of the Bureau of Vital Statistics in Virginia, right? This was a state act that was passed. And I'm going to also go ahead and show you how Walter Plecker started writing into many different states and to federal agencies to implement this very act through the eugenics movement. And this is how it was transferred into other states and implemented over time. Some of them, some of them will show you, but let's get into the read. Mixtures of either of these crossings with true Negro should be designated as black, Negro, or colored. What is a true Negro? Because Negro just is a Latin word for black. What is a true Negro, right? True Negro is not a race. It's not a race, right? So, and they never mention African at all in this. They're going to mention a lot of races, but never once in the Racial Integrity Act does he ever mention Africa, ever, right? He's going to mention Japanese, Chinese, Mongolians, and Malayans stay in their race, but never once did he ever say that we were African. I want you to understand that. Never once. And remember, at this time, the word black and Negro in and of itself can mean anybody, right? With dark hues. You had the Negritos, which were the Asians that came from the Manila, Philippines, right? You had some Europeans who also called Negro, Spanish, the Sephardic Jews, so forth and so on. You had some Dutch, some Irish people who were called Negroes because of their dark hue of complexion. You're referring to a hue of complexion, not a race. As you will see that he's giving races, Japanese, Chinese, Mongolian, but then he says these people are true blacks. What is that, right? So let's go on. He says the term mixed issues, perhaps one or two others will be understood to mean mixed or white or black races with white predominating. This class that should be reported with the greatest care, as many of these are on the borderline and constitute the real danger of race intermixture, right? So it says the term Indian will no longer, the word no longer means used to, right? The term Indian will no longer be accepted for that class of people, us, right? That term India will no longer be accepted for that class, but must be applied only to those known as pure Indian blood or those mixed with white. Now make that make sense. How can somebody mixed with white be a pure Indian, right? And then how were you able to determine what a pure Indian was, right? When race and nationality DNA testing did not happen into the 2000s, right? So if you can go on and read where Walter Plecker was just trying to find ways to steal land patents. This is also when these are around the times of stealing of land. They had already in the late 1800s lynched a lot of black people stealing their land, and now this was a way to segregate after they had stolen the land. They wanted to keep you off the land by any means so that you could not fight to get your land back after they had stolen your land, your patents, and and our businesses. And this is how this was their check and mate to keep it out of our hands through reclassification. All right, so he said, excellent question. You're pointing to one of the most disturbing episodes in historical U.S. racial classification. Let's unpack how Walter Plecker, Virginia Registrar of Vital Statistics, used the 1924 Racial Integrity Act and the eugenics movement to change records, not just in Virginia, but to influence other states and even federal systems. Walter Ashley Plecker gave his birth. Don't nobody care about none of that. He was a white supremacist, right? I don't know what that says. I don't know how to say that. White supremacists and eugenists who believe that racial purity must be preserved through strict documentation and control of birth and marriage and death certificate. Remember, like I said, this was how they implemented after. They went on a lynching spree, stealing the lands, and this is how they check and mate you not getting your land and identity back, was to keep the white supremacy going. So it says eugenics movements influence early 19 eugenics, false science of improving human population through selective breeding, gained power in U.S. Virginia became a national leader. Eugenic policies. Plecker worked closely with eugenics like John Powell, Anglo-Saxon Clubs of America, who lobbied for laws to prevent race mixing. right? That's not all what he did. He lobbied together after they lynched and stole our land to make sure that the land could not get back in our hands by any means necessary. Like eminent domain. Taking our property and then saying eminent domain for the U.S. government for society was also one of the biggest things that was done, I believe, in the 1850s. Don't quote me on it, but you can look up when eminent domain became something that was done, a law or an act that was passed congressionally, so that companies can come in and take the land, even when people who are sovereign to this land, are inheritors to this land, cannot fight to get it back based on eminent domain. But you can, though. I'm going to do another video on that, because eminent domain does not mean they can just come and take your land, because they can, if they say, oh, well, the government is using it for something for the public, right? Y'all, it's a bunch of shit what they did to take this land over y'all, and the ways and the tactics that they used to get this land out of the hands of us American Indian, us true American Indian, right? Not the ones that's on the reservations, because clearly Walter Pleckler knew that these were, Siberians, right? These were Russians that came in during the same time as Slavs in the 1840s and even in the 2000s, right? You will see that they came here. Your Chino slaves, such as Mexicans, they came earlier than that. They came in the 1600s, right? Those are the Asian slaves in colonial Mexico, from Chino to Indian. You could go read that book, that became indigenous vassals of the Spanish royal crown, and that's how they were given freedom from the conquering or the colonizing of the Spanish and Portuguese of Asia that brought them into America. That's a whole little thing, and y'all. But anyway, these are acts of laws passed in states and then pushed. But anyway, I just wanted to do that quick video. I didn't want it to be long, but you can't. I just wanted to go back over and revamp this information just to let you know. You can go ahead and see how they went through to many different states, right? And they forced through he sent letters to Congress. He sent many letters into Congress. He sent many letters to federal agencies to implement this law of erasure of American Indian. So I hope this is quick enough. I'm sorry, guys. I tried to do it the best way I could. But anyway, this is Kendra with Trust TV. Like, share, and subscribe, guys. Stay up, stay blessed. Put God first above all else. Peace out. Bye for now.